Today's Remembrance Sunday. Many of us would have been at a war memorial, perhaps in the village square on the green. Some of you will have got war memorials in your actual churches. And all of a sudden, we're having to do it in a much more modest way. Though, of course, remembering is about what's up here rather than what we do, although often what we do is an expression of what we remembered. You'll notice I'm wearing a poppy. This is quite common at this time of year. Of course, we not only remember the poppies of Flanders, but through the British Legion, we're reminded of the results of war and our common need to look after those who have suffered in one way or another. And we need to say thank you to people, organisations like the Royal British Legion, though there are other agencies. And of course, the Church historically has done good works in looking after those during a time of crisis and war, not forgetting the chaplains serving in the armed forces, bringing some comfort and guidance to those in troubled times, and for those returning home. So remembering is part of life. We remember to do certain things, sometimes out of habit, sometimes because we've been given a reminder. Somebody sent us a memo, or a friend or a member of our family will literally tell us, don't forget. And here we are remembering. Of course, in the gospel story for today, there were a few young women who hadn't remembered. And as a consequence, they found themselves in a very difficult situation. In fact, desperate. They were required to do something and ended up not being able to do it. It's interesting, those bridesmaids really ought to have known better, ought to have remembered. I'm sure it was deep in the psyche of those who were bridesmaids. You need your lamps, but you also will need extra oil. Often people are late, so cover yourself off well. But not these five. Who knows? Perhaps they were so excited by what was going on, so distracted, that they didn't remember. And we can be easily distracted. Sometimes there's too much going on, and so we get ourselves into a bit of a state when we then wake up, as it were, and remember that we should have done something. I'm sure people are also remembering at this time what life used to be like. Remember when we could go to the pub in a large group. Remember when we could have all our friends round for a barbecue. Remember, I'm sure I don't need to remind you what you've been remembering. Some things are more important than others, and remembering is part of how we evaluate what needs to be considered carefully, perhaps on a day-to-day basis. As Christians, we're called to love our neighbour as ourselves. We're called to love God. And we have a duty and a care, and sometimes remember to do that well, and other times, as I know myself, we can forget, and our behaviour doesn't reflect those Christian values which Jesus taught his followers, and which we try to live by in our society today. I would call them the Christian values. We should not be ashamed of that. But of course, we need to remember, if it's going to really resonate with outside of the church communities, those perhaps who don't have a faith that we have, then we need to remind them through our behaviour and our words and actions, what we refrain from as much as what we do. I've got here some medals that were given to my father, and at this time of year I rummage around and get them out, often showing them now to the grandchildren. Now, I don't need to remember my father through medals. I remember him through so many different ways. But sometimes that rummaging around and pulling out the medals and chatting to my grandchildren just reminds me that my father served his country. And we have people doing the same today, not necessarily through armed forces, but through police, fire and ambulance services, nurses and doctors. So many different ways people are serving our nation. Let us remember them so that we can live peaceably one with another, and remember that Jesus died and rose again for our salvation. These are the important things that we need to remember.